Welcome to Imperium Undone. In the shadows of Rome, power is seduced, bought, and betrayed. Written by Brian M. Brumbaugh, narrated by Gwyneth Paltrow. A political thriller set during the year of the Five Emperors, where beauty is a weapon, and the fate of Rome rests in the hands of two women. Let's begin. Chapter 1. Ashes of Commodus. Rome stank of blood and perfume. The divine Commodus, emperor, gladiator, demigod, had been strangled in his marble bathtub like a common debtor, his final breath bubbling through oil-slicked water and the stench of rose petals. And though no herald yet cried it from the Capitoline, the city already knew. Whispers moved faster than fire. Slaves dropped amphorae without realizing it. Merchants left scales unbalanced. A charioteer, halfway through training his horses in the Circus Maximus, stopped mid-turn and stared toward the Palatine Hill like he could see the crown falling through air. In the shaded portico of the Temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus, Cecilia Octaviana stood still in her blue silk slippers as news echoed down the colonnade. She smiled. "Dead?" she asked, not to confirm but to savor the taste of the word aloud. It slid from her tongue like honey. A breathless courier, armor half unbuckled, bowed as if she were already empress. Strangled by his wrestling partner. The Praetorians say it was divine judgment. She raised one perfect brow. The gods must be fickle wrestlers. Cecilia moved through the streets of Rome like a flame through linen, beautiful, dangerous, and drawing eyes in her wake. She was 21 and unbothered by the panic around her. The world was unmade and made again every time Rome changed emperors. The difference now was that she would help mold the next. Cecilia's father, Senator Gaius Octavianus, was already shouting within the Curia Julia, calling for order while secretly hoping for favor. Men like him grasped for thrones like gamblers reached for dice, hoping this time their bloodline would matter. But Cecilia knew the game better than any of them. She did not beg the gods. She made herself divine. As she crossed the forum, chaos boiled behind every arch. Guards clutched their gladii tighter. Senators huddled like hens under eaves. Prostitutes slashed their prices in the alleyways beside the temple of Castor and Pollux. The world did not pause. It simply recalculated. And she? She moved like she'd already seen the result. Far above, in the second story of the Basilica Aemilia, a woman watched in silence. Messalina Iunia, daughter of a forgotten historian, sat behind an open scroll desk as the city writhed beneath her. 24, quiet, unmarried, unnoticed. The kind of woman men assumed took vows of chastity, or worse, philosophy. Her ink-stained fingers tapped the edge of her bench as she traced Cecilia's path across the forum. Messalina did not move like a flame. She moved like a shadow cast by something greater. But she listened, and Rome always whispered before it screamed. She looked down at the forum steps where Cecilia paused to speak to a Praetorian officer. His hand lingered at her waist a moment too long. Chapter 2. The Puppet Throne. Pertinax had lasted long enough for Rome to breathe, but not long enough for her to believe again. The old governor had emerged from the chaos like a modest flame in a windstorm. The Senate called him a philosopher king. The legions whispered placeholder. Cecilia called him dead man walking. Still, she played the part. Draped in muted silk, seated beside her father during the Senate's emergency session, she watched Pertinax ascend the Palatine steps in his modest purple robe. He did not look like an emperor. He looked like a man trying to talk lions out of hunger. Later that night, the Praetorian commander, her lover, her pawn, rested beside her, and she whispered her judgment into the shadows. He wears the purple like a burial shroud. The commander had chuckled. She didn't. Pertinax tried. He lowered grain prices, dismissed corrupt officials, even refused the golden throne sent from Egypt, preferring a plain chair of carved pine. And then, his greatest crime, he spoke of discipline. The Praetorians bristled. No more bonuses, no more bribes, no more whores in the barracks or tribute wagons loaded with Spanish wine. He wanted soldiers to be soldiers again. Cecilia warned him, through the commander. But old men with honor rarely listened to younger women with ambition. So, on the 86th day of his reign, the guards dragged him from his writing table in the Domus Augustana and butchered him in the Peristyle garden. They stabbed him 37 times. They left his body beneath a fig tree. By nightfall, it was gone, dragged into the gutter by dogs. The next morning, a man stood atop the Castra Praetoria's walls and announced an imperial auction. Open, public, shameless. The throne goes to the highest bidder, payment in gold, cash only. Cecilia, reclined on her atrium chaise, laughed until wine spilled down her chin. The empire, the provinces, the garrisons, the sacred title of Augustus was being sold like a prostitute in the Subura. 2 men appeared at the gates. One, Titus Flavius Sulpicianus, Pertinax's father-in-law, offering land and honor. The other, Didius Julianus, a wealthy ex-consul who smelled like garlic and ambition. Julianus raised his bid, and raised it again and again. When he offered 25,000 sesterces per guard, the Praetorians cheered. The gates opened. Rome had a new emperor. Cecilia did not wait to be summoned. She arrived at Julianus's villa with a bottle of Cypriot perfume and a gown so sheer it may as well have been air. Her carriage bore no crest, her sandals no dust. He opened the door himself. Julianus was a barrel of a man, short, red-faced, balding, with hands that shook from indulgence and a tongue that stumbled over flattery like a drunk on marble steps. You honor me, Lady Octaviana," he stammered, eyes trapped between her face and her chest. Cecilia touched his cheek like one touches a dying bird. "I come not to honor you," she purred. "I come to claim what I already own." By dusk, she sat beside him in the tablinum as he scribbled imperial orders with shaking fingers. She had chosen his first 3 decrees. She had drafted the 4th herself. He didn't question it. He stared at her as if she were Venus reborn, descending not from Olympus, but the Palatine itself. When he announced his ascension from the rostra the next morning, Cecilia stood behind him in flowing white, crowned with the golden laurel he'd insisted she wear. The people watched in silence. They did not cheer. They did not riot. They did not believe. But their eyes followed her. That night, in the shadows of the Temple of Vesta, someone carved into the stone, "Rome belongs not to her emperor, but to his whore." She smiled when she saw it. In the forgotten wing of the Temple of Concord, a single oil lamp burned long after midnight. Messalina Iunia sat alone, surrounded by scrolls, tablets, and ledgers wrapped in wax-stamped leather. She had bribed a minor archivist for access, exchanged nothing but knowledge and quiet kindness. She had no lovers, no allies, no bodyguards, only a pen and her memory. She compiled a growing book of names, bribes, backroom deals, and whispers too valuable to shout. Her ledger was a weapon, not of blood, but of truth. Cecilia played with power. Messalina wrote its obituary. And if Cecilia was Rome's seduction, Messalina would become its reckoning. 3 weeks passed. Cecilia no longer visited the Forum on foot. Crowds formed before her litter. Children threw flower petals. Senators bowed lower than law required. Didius Julianus, meanwhile, aged like milk in summer. His voice cracked, his hands trembled. His nights belonged to wine and flesh, and his days to Cecilia. He issued decrees he barely understood. He slept with her once, maybe twice. She let him believe he was still a man. By the time whispers of Septimius Severus reached Rome, marching from the Rhine with 20,000 men, Julianus began to weep during meals. Cecilia did not flinch. She simply whispered to him between bites of fig and honey, "Let them come. You still have me." He believed her. On the eve of the calends, Cecilia climbed the Palatine Hill barefoot. She wore nothing but a sheer gown of Tyrian purple and a single gold chain at her waist. Musicians played a low, haunting hymn beneath her terrace. The moon hung low, and all of Rome seemed to hold its breath. Senators lit candles for the gods. The people whispered prayers. The guards saluted her as she passed, not as a consort, as something more. From atop the hill, with Rome spread beneath her like a lover, Cecilia whispered to the wind, "If Rome is for sale." She turned, smiled at the stars, and finished it aloud. "Then let her lie beneath me like every other man." Chapter 3. The Lion from Africa. They said he marched with 20,000 men and the ghosts of 1,000 more. From Leptis Magna to the northern gates of Rome, Septimius Severus moved not like a man seeking power, but like one retrieving what was stolen. He was no child of the Julii or Claudii. He wore no crown of golden laurel, but one of iron resolve. His legions did not sing hymns, they sharpened swords. They had seen the East, the Nile, the Numidian wastes, and they had no time for Senate games. The news arrived in pulses, like drumbeats. He crossed the Rubicon. He took Ravenna without a blade drawn. He now controls the fleet. He will not negotiate. Rome's breath caught, and so did Cecilia's. Cecilia invited the Severan envoy to her villa at sunset. A Carthaginian-born officer named Lucius Plautianus, tall and scarred, eyes the color of tempered steel. She met him beneath a flowering arbor, barefoot, draped in gold-threaded silk, skin bathed in olive oil and torchlight. She poured him wine. She told him stories. She reached for his hand across the mosaic table of Venus and Mars, and he pulled away. "You are beautiful," he said, voice like gravel on parchment. "But Severus serves no goddess born in Rome, only one born in Africa." He left without finishing the wine. Cecilia stood in silence long after the torches burned low. She had never been refused before. Julianus wept as he signed his own death decree. When the Severan legions reached the outskirts of the city, the Senate, emboldened by fear, declared him illegitimate. The Praetorians melted away like fog under sunlight. There was no battle, no siege, no proclamation of defiance. Julianus was found in the imperial dining hall, surrounded by empty goblets and sweet figs, trembling as a Severan officer read the order. "You bought Rome," the officer said. "Now it's time to pay one clean stroke." His body was left on the same steps Pertinax had bled upon. Rome did not mourn. Cecilia stood at her balcony as the body was dragged away. She wore a crimson robe and an unreadable expression. Inside, her hands trembled. She did not cry. She did not scream. But for the first time since Commodus fell, she bled inwardly. Messalina found the message by accident, tucked into a scroll of tax decrees bound for the temple archives. It was addressed to the Senate, written in Severus's hand. Short, brutal. "I will enter Rome without resistance. Those who resist will not be remembered. Those who kneel will not be harmed." She read it thrice. Then she did not file it. She memorized it. That night, she copied the phrasing onto her own parchment and added a single line beneath. "The lion doesn't roar in Rome. He waits until Rome begs to be eaten." She burned the original. Within a week, Messalina Iunia was seen walking the gardens of the Temple of Mars with a young tribune, Aulus Caecina, known for his battlefield valor and lack of patience for Senate games. They spoke quietly, often. When asked, he claimed she was simply an old family acquaintance. But the bills he began supporting, the reforms he suggested, they matched language only ever found in Messalina's private commentary. She had no title, no station, but power? She had begun to taste it, and it tasted nothing like figs and wine. Septimius Severus entered Rome without fanfare. He rode a black horse through the city gates, past the statues of emperors who had ruled before him, past the same stones Commodus had once walked barefoot in mockery of the gods. No trumpets, no speech, only silence. The citizens lined the streets, heads bowed, breath shallow. Cecilia watched from her father's villa. Her eyes met Severus's as he passed. Just for a moment, he did not slow. He did not acknowledge her. That, more than anything, was the wound. The lion doesn't roar in Rome. He waits until Rome begs to be eaten. Chapter 4. Vultures and Laurel. While Rome watched from marble balconies, fire spread across two fronts. In the east, Pescennius Niger, governor of Syria, declared himself the rightful heir to Commodus. In the west, Clodius Albinus, governor of Britannia, claimed equal right and marched south with hardened northern legions. Between them stood Septimius Severus, the lion already crowned. He moved with calculated brutality, sending his generals east, riding west himself. Civil war was no longer rumor, it was record. And through it all, Cecilia whispered across both battlefields. Clodius Albinus was not a handsome man, but he was ambitious, lonely, and superstitious. Cecilia arrived in Lugdunum draped in black velvet, claiming to be a diplomatic intermediary sent by the Senate. She offered not alliances but omens, visions, dreams, warnings delivered beneath silk sheets. He believed her. For 11 nights she shared his bed. She traced battle maps on his skin, kissed his insecurities, and murmured fabricated promises of a pro-Senate uprising if he marched fast and hard. On the 12th day, she vanished. By the 15th, Severus ambushed him outside the city walls with legions waiting in the forest shadows. "You never lay with me," she would say later. "You lay with your own undoing." In the east, Niger's defeat was less poetic. He was chased across the Euphrates by Severus's generals and slaughtered at the border like a stray dog. His severed head was sent back in a lead-lined box and presented to the Senate. Cecilia watched as the box was unsealed. She made no sound. She only asked if it smelled of myrrh or dirt. Messalina Iunia was no longer invisible. Her appointment to the Senate's Reform Council came quietly, signed by a minor tribune she had once tutored in private, backed by a senator who now quoted her essays as if they were his own. She wore no jewels. She wielded no sword, but her desk sat in the same hall where Cicero once argued and Cato once bled. Every decree passed through her ink-stained hands. She copied, amended, annotated, and when she whispered to senators over candlelit scrolls, they listened, some without realizing it. Power, she had learned, was not held. It was shaped. Cecilia returned to Rome as war waned. Her villa was quiet. Her father gone, exiled or dead, none could say. Her chambers still bore the scent of incense from her last ritual. It was the old family slave, Otho, who told her. Bent with age, blind in one eye, still loyal. Your grandmother, lady. She was no freedwoman, no merchant's wife. She was kept by the philosopher-emperor Marcus Aurelius. A bastard line, unacknowledged, unclaimed, but real. And now, all the others were dead. Commodus, Pertinax, Julianus, Niger, Albinus. Even Lucilla's children, once safe in exile, had vanished. She stood before her mirror and whispered, "There is no throne to seduce, only a crown to claim." She did not seek Severus's bed, not this time. She appeared at court, veiled in deep violet, her eyes lined with gold dust, her voice pitched like a priestess reciting fate. She spoke in riddles. She quoted Aurelius. She let the rumors bloom like roses soaked in blood. She is his blood. She seduced Albinus to protect Rome. She knows the Sibylline books. The emperor tolerated her. The Senate feared her. The women envied her. The men dreamed of her. And she dreamed of the moment Severus died, and the moment Rome turned to her as what it had never had. A woman who ruled without apology. Empire is not seized by armies alone. Sometimes it is whispered into your bed. Chapter 5, Gods of the Arena. It had been 6 months since Albinus bled out on the banks of the Rhone. Rome was restless. The war-torn provinces murmured about famine. Grain from Egypt had been delayed by pirates. The Senate fought over tax relief with the desperation of gamblers clawing at a rigged table. So Septimius Severus did what emperors always did when the people neared the edge of hunger. He gave them blood. For 10 days, the Flavian amphitheater thundered with the screams of men, the roar of beasts, and the drunken howls of the masses. It was a celebration of Severus's unification of the empire. It was also a distraction. Cecilia Octaviana arrived on the 4th day of the games, seated beside the imperial box, but not in it. She wore a gown of scarlet trimmed in lion fur, her hair braided in the Numidian style as a silent nod or mockery of Severus's African roots. Her presence was not announced. She did not need it to be. 1,000 eyes followed her as she moved to her seat. Senators, soldiers, merchants, widows, all watched, all wondered. She smiled politely at the emperor. He did not return it, but he did not remove her either. That was the dance. On the 7th day, the crowd packed the arena for the final match, a duel between 2 star gladiators. Each promised freedom if victorious. Cecilia's rival, Senator Verinius Aquilus, sat directly across the arena from her, surrounded by clients and flattery. He had recently called for the public exposure of illegitimate bloodlines, code for her. He had to go. During the match, as the blades clashed below, a slave spilled wine on Aquilus's lap. As he stood, brushing away the stain, a trained panther, meant to be released for the final act, leapt the barricade and tore into his throat before the crowd could blink. His guards froze. His screams were lost beneath cheers. The beast was shot with 2 arrows, and the games resumed. Cecilia never turned her head. She simply picked up her goblet, sipped, and said, "Unfortunate. Such rare wine." That same evening, Messalina Iunia walked the quiet cloisters of the House of the Vestals, following a rumor she'd heard from an elderly archivist that a former High Vestal named Tullia Marcia still lived in the back chambers, blind now, half forgotten, but with a memory sharp as obsidian. She found her by a cracked fountain, tracing her fingers through its surface like she was touching time itself. Messalina approached slowly, bearing only olive bread and silence. The old woman spoke first. "You smell like ink and truth." I remember that. What followed was a murmur of names, illegitimate daughters, imperial indiscretions. The truth of Cecilia's grandmother, kept in secret chambers beneath the temple of Jupiter, visited often by Marcus Aurelius, forbidden to bear his name. But she did. Aurelia Caelestis. The blood was real, but so were the lies that buried it. Messalina added a new page to her book that night, written not in ink, but in coded verse and veiled reference. If exposed, it would be dismissed as myth. But for those who could read between the lines, it was a blade, one she would not yet unsheath. Not until the Empire forgot the games and remembered who held the ink. On the final night of the games, Severus offered the people a rare spectacle, a battle between lions and armored criminals, stripped of all but helmets and chains. The crowd screamed with joy as the sand turned black. Cecilia did not flinch. Messalina, seated high in the shade beside a reformist senator, did not cheer. She watched the people. She watched them forget. She watched them be ruled. And she whispered softly to the man beside her, "Bread for the belly, blood for the eyes, lies for the empire." He didn't understand, but he would. Bread for the belly, blood for the eyes, lies for the empire. Chapter 6. Bloodlines of Power. The chamber was small, dark, and buried beneath the Temple of Vesta. Its walls were lined with scrolls never meant to see open air, birth records, seduction reports, temple denouncements, family lines sanitized for Senate review. Cecilia Octaviana sat alone at the center table, lit only by a single lantern. Before her, 3 scrolls, 1 real and 2 forged. She knew the difference. So did the woman seated across from her, Fabia Flixilla, disgraced notary, former imperial clerk, now living on bribes and red ink. "You understand the risk?" Flixilla asked, her voice like dried reeds. "Forgery of imperial documents carries death." "Not if they're never questioned," Cecilia said, gently running a finger over the wax seal. "Not if they're believed." Gaius Annius Severus was a cousin to the emperor, a young patrician, handsome in the fragile way of marble statues left too long in the rain. His teeth were perfect, his spine less so. He had recently returned from Antioch, where he'd spent more time gambling in brothels than commanding garrisons. Cecilia found him drunk on perfumed wine and guilt. She fed him stories of Marcus Aurelius's bastard line, of how their union would strengthen Severus's hold, of how they could become Rome's next dynasty. He listened, he wept, he undressed. 3 weeks later, a notice circulated through the city. Lady Cecilia Octaviana, of the line of Aurelius, is to be joined in sacred matrimony to Gaius Annius Severus. Senators scoffed, the people cheered. The emperor said nothing. But the scroll was hung in the forum, waxed in red, and signed with the Octaviana seal, now amended with the stylized initials M.A. Marcus Aurelius. Cecilia had made her move. And Rome, for a moment, believed. Far from the colonnades of ceremony, Messalina Iunia sat across from Senator Decimus Petronius, leader of the Republic faction, a cautious man, silver-haired and scandal-wary. She laid the scroll down gently on the table between them. "This," she said, "is the truth, the original birth record of Aurelia Caelestis, mistress to Marcus Aurelius." It confirmed the bloodline, yes, but it also revealed the price. Aurelia had been paid to stay hidden. She bore no title, no claim. Her existence was concealed by imperial decree, buried behind temple walls and paid witnesses. Cecilia's descent was real, but her claim to power, built on lies, silence, and blood unpaid. Messalina handed Petronius a second scroll, Cecilia's forged version. "She will present this in the forum. You must let her—" He blinked. Let her lie? Messalina smiled. Let her fall. Cecilia stood on the rostra, arms bare, gown white as sacrifice, hair crowned in gold. Thousands filled the forum below, citizens, senators, slaves, scribes. Even Severus was rumored to be watching from the shadows behind a columned veil. She read the scroll aloud. Her voice was flawless, her Latin divine, her expression a mixture of reverence and sovereign certainty. I am Cecilia Octaviana, daughter of Gaius, granddaughter of Aurelia Caelestis, and by her blood, of Marcus Aurelius. Rome does not raise me. I rise to remind Rome, who it once birthed, gasps, applause, the thunder of feet against marble, coins thrown in offering, priests murmuring omens. But beneath the din, eyes narrowed. Senators leaned into each other. Whispers passed like poison between mouths. Even Severus did not emerge. Hours later, as torches were lit across the city and wine spilled from every corner tavern in honor of Rome's new blood, Messalina sat alone in the reform chamber of the temple archives. A single oil lamp illuminated the original scroll. She held it gently. She did not destroy it. She did not expose it. She simply bound it in twine and tucked it beneath the floorboard beneath her feet. Not yet, because the gods did not name their daughters. They waited for them to name themselves. And then, if unworthy, they let the truth do the rest. The gods do not name their daughters. They let them name themselves. Chapter 7. A Crown of Lies. Septimius Severus left Rome in the hands of silence. He marched east to crush Parthian defiance, leaving behind no heir, no regent, no trusted steward, just absence. Cecilia filled the void, not officially, not by decree, but de facto through proximity, persuasion, and the sheer inertia of fear and reverence. She held no title, but her signature appeared at the bottom of every grain requisition, tax reform, and senatorial censure issued in Severus's name. The Senate did not object. They bowed. Across Rome, construction erupted. Temples, not to Jupiter, not to Mars, not even to Venus, to her. White marble shrines dedicated to Cecilia Octaviana Augusta appeared beside bakeries and bathhouses. Statues carved her in godlike form, eyes toward the heavens, scroll in one hand, a lion cub at her feet. Mothers brought daughters to touch her likeness for luck. Children memorized verses that compared her to Minerva reborn. Coins began to circulate bearing her profile alongside Severus, a move that would have been unthinkable a year ago. Cecilia didn't just want power, she wanted permanence. Cecilia's reforms were swift and cruel. Her allies were elevated. Governors who had once jeered her name were recalled. Land was redistributed. Tax forgiveness flowed, if the names aligned with her favor. But for others, entire estates seized, and families exiled. One senator's tongue removed in public for referring to her as the actress on the rostra. Messalina copied every name. It began with a scrap of parchment found pinned to the doors of the Temple of Saturn, a crown built on forged stone cracks under honest feet. The next week, pamphlets circulated in the Suburra, parables about a fox draped in lion's fur, a priestess who faked visions, a woman who bled not imperial blood, but merchant ink. No name was signed, but the language was sharp, surgical. Messalina Iunia watched from the shadows, feeding Rome truths dressed as riddles. She didn't just expose Cecilia. She seeded doubt, and doubt is what topples statues. Crowds that once cheered Cecilia now watched her pass in silence. A woman spat on the steps of her new temple. Children mocked her coin by flipping it into piss pots. Senators once loyal began to arrive late, or not at all. And beneath it all, one whispered phrase, repeated from forum to fountain, from bathhouse to brothel: "She is not of true blood." Cecilia did not beg. She did not flinch. She ordered the arrest of every senator in the reform wing, including Petronius, Messalina's silent backer. Dozens were dragged from their homes at midnight. Scrolls were burned, homes confiscated. She gave a speech beneath her own statue in the forum, her voice steady. "Let them curse my name. They will still bow when I pass." The people applauded, not because they believed her, because they were afraid. Messalina wrote her next letter not to the people but to the gods. She burned it at the altar of Vesta. It read, "When the throne forgets its weight, the flame must remind it. Let them curse my name. They will still bow when I pass." Chapter 8. The Fall of the Falcon. Rome had not heard from Septimius Severus in 5 months. Then came the smoke signals above Ostia's harbor and the thunder of ships' prows crashing into dock. His legions marched with discipline, not celebration, silent, eyes forward, dust cloaking their armor like mourning veils. He entered the city not to cheers, but to tension. No trumpet, no torchlight procession, just the measured sound of 20,000 boots echoing through streets where statues of Cecilia Octaviana now stood taller than the gods. He said nothing that day. But every senator, slave, and soldier knew Rome was about to choose sides. It began quietly, one sealed envelope delivered to the home of Senator Marius Pansa, a longtime supporter of Cecilia. Inside, a copy of Aurelia Caelestis's original lineage, authenticated by 4 temple archivists and bearing the ancient seal of the Order of Minerva. No forgery, no poetry, just names, dates, and imperial hush money. The next day, 5 more letters arrived at key households, then 50, then 1,000. By the week's end, scrolls were posted on Senate doors, temple walls, and bathhouse entrances. Cecilia Octaviana, of blood, yes. Of lies, absolutely. Messalina's script was never credited, but Rome had learned to recognize her silence by its sting. Cecilia moved fast, too fast. On the second night of Severus's return, she summoned a scribe, one of Messalina's former colleagues, to the palace. She offered gold, then poison, then death. The man talked. Her next move was to send a gift to the Temple of Concord, a satchel of candied figs, wine, and a scroll soaked in slow-spreading toxin. But Messalina did not touch it. Her acolyte died in her place, eyes bleeding, voice lost to paralysis. The message was clear. You are seen. And the retaliation came not in steel, but in whispers loud enough to break marble. The Praetorian Guard, once Cecilia's silent weapon, began to crack. First, a captain refused to clear the Senate floor during a scheduled address. Then 2 of her personal guards vanished, reassigned by imperial edict. Then came the final blow. Gaius Annius Severus, her cousin and would-be consort, arrived in chains at the forum gates and declared her documents a fraud born of lust, not legacy. He offered no apology, only survival. Cecilia watched the announcement from her inner chamber. She did not scream, she did not cry. She simply removed the laurel crown from her head and placed it in a burning brazier. She was no longer received at the Senate. Her temples were shuttered. The coins bearing her image were melted down for weapons. Cecilia retreated into the Palatine Palace, locking the gates, dismissing all but the most loyal guards, and surrounding herself with scrolls, incense, and the last broken remains of her myth. She paced halls lined with statues of herself. She scrawled letters to gods that had long stopped listening. She read old love poems and wept into their margins. At night, she stood on the highest balcony, wearing nothing but her ring, and whispered her own obituary to the stars. When Messalina finally came, it was not with soldiers. It was with parchment, witnesses, and flame. She walked the steps of the Palatine in full daylight, her modest tunic dusted with ash from a temple pyre. Behind her trailed senators, archivists, temple virgins, and surviving members of the reform wing, all holding the original documents. The gates were open. No one stopped them. Inside, Cecilia stood barefoot in the great hall, her eyes lined with soot, her gown soaked in perfume and desperation. Messalina did not shout. She simply approached, held up the scroll, and said, "This is the truth you tried to burn." Cecilia looked once at the flame behind them, once at the scroll, then turned her gaze to the tall window above and said nothing. That night, smoke rose from the Palatine. The guards found her body draped across the feet of her own statue, hair braided like a goddess, eyes closed, a single scroll clutched in her hand. Her forged lineage, no blood, no wound. The cause of death was listed as refusal. Rome burned her in the public square, not as empress, not as traitor, but as myth. A monument stands where she fell. Its inscription reads, "Here lies the woman who crowned herself. She wanted to be a goddess." Rome gave her a martyr's pyre instead. Chapter 9. The Quiet Victory. They marched Cecilia Octaviana through the forum barefoot and bare, not draped in finery, not veiled like a condemned patrician, naked. Her arms were bound with twine. Her hair was hacked unevenly by the city's lowest barber. Her gold ring had been pried from her finger and thrown into the crowd, fought over like a fallen bread crust. She walked with her back straight, not in defiance, but in mourning for herself. The woman who once ruled from shadows now stood under Rome's full glare, divine no longer, only mortal, and about to die for it. The sentence was carried out not at the Palatine, but on the Gemonian stairs, where traitors were broken and exposed. She was not whipped. She was not crucified. She was simply beheaded, cleanly, by an ex-gladiator who had once fought in her honor. No cheers, no boos, just silence. The blood ran down the stairs, pooling in the cracks where others had died. A flower was tossed by a girl too young to know who Cecilia was, only that she looked like a princess in a nightmare. The body was burned that night. No tomb, no inscription, no temple, only ashes scattered to the Tiber. Messalina Iunia was offered everything: a seat in the Senate, a marble home on the Aventine, a statue in the Temple of Concord. She took none of it. She left Rome the next morning before the ash settled, slipping into the countryside with a satchel of scrolls, a worn leather cloak, and no guards. Some say she returned to her mother's orchard near Capua. Others claim she joined a scriptorium in Hispania, copying poetry under a false name. One rumor says she joined the Vestals and never spoke again. But those who knew her, they knew the truth. She had done what she came to do. Within a month, 5 new senators were seated. Quiet men, former scribes, landowners, poets. Each had once attended a private gathering in Messalina's apartment above the archives. Each now carried reform agendas: tax restructuring, land redistribution, guard rotation oversight, a restoration of the Republic's core values, not through revolution, but revision. They never spoke her name, but they quoted her writings like gospel. In the Subura, they no longer spat on statues. Children recited new verses, not of gods and emperors, but of a girl with ink-stained fingers who defeated a lion and burned a goddess. Pamphlets re-emerged, not of defiance, but remembrance. At the Temple of Minerva, a candle burned each night, unclaimed by priest or citizen, but always lit. And in quiet places, between the scratch of stylus and the silence of thought, the city whispered not of war or lust or lineage, but of clarity, of truth, of her. Rome was saved not by the sword nor by the flesh, but by a quiet girl with ink-stained fingers. Chapter 10. Imperium Undone. The villa sat at the edge of an old orchard near Capua, where the lemon trees bloomed out of season and the wind smelled of ink and ripening fruit. Children's voices echoed through the stone halls, reading, debating, laughing in the pauses between Latin phrases. At the center of it all stood Messalina Iunia, matron of the school, draped not in silk but in linen robes smudged with chalk and oil. She was older now. Not old, but softened by years spent teaching rather than toppling. Her hands still bore ink stains. Her mind remained sharper than any Senate blade. The scroll room was small, stone-walled and warm with candlelight. Shelves lined with texts in Greek Latin and 6 coded dialects. Scrolls preserved in waxed casings, newer ones copied in careful young hands. Today's lesson was rhetoric. The girls sat in a semicircle on woven reed mats, styluses ready. The air smelled of papyrus and rain. Messalina opened a scroll. It was not one she normally taught from. Its edges were worn, its ribbon pale red. Her fingers brushed the seal, and she began to read, not with the fire of the forum, but the gentleness of memory. A girl raised her hand, small, curious, unafraid. She had a birthmark on her temple and a mind as restless as a fox. Matrona, she asked, was the goddess real? The room fell silent, not because they understood the full weight of the question, but because they sensed it mattered. Messalina looked out the arched window to the horizon where Capua's bells rang faintly, and black smoke rose far off in the direction of Rome. A new emperor crowned, a new name in the records, a new symbol on the coin, the cycle, still turning. Messalina closed the scroll without a sound. She ran her thumb along the edge where Cecilia's name had once been scrawled in gold. She was many things, she said, a goddess to some, a tyrant to others, a girl always, but real? She smiled. She was as real as Rome itself, loved, feared, built on lies and longing. And when it fell, it did not fall to a sword. Later, alone in the quiet of dusk, Messalina sat by the fire. She opened a second scroll, one never read aloud, never shelved in the library. It was her own, written in code, written in silence, a record of everything, the forgery, the pamphlets, the Senate takedown, the walk through flame, the girl who became myth, then ash. She added one final line at the bottom of the parchment. Let them remember her however they need. Let them forget me if they must. But let the Empire learn. She rolled the scroll, tied it shut, and placed it in the fire. As the flame devoured the past, the bell at the gate rang. Another family, another girl. Messalina rose, brushed the ash from her hands, and stepped into the sunlight. The orchard swayed with wind. Laughter called from the hall. And beyond it all, Rome lived on. Older, hungrier, not wiser, but seated with the memory of a woman no monument would name. But still, they whispered her. And they remembered the girl with ink-stained fingers. Empire is not what you inherit. It's what you undo. The end. Author's note. Thank you for joining us on this journey through power, seduction, and silence, through the ash-choked ruins of an empire that was never truly built on stone, but on whispers, secrets, and ambition. Imperium Undone was born from a single question. What if the most dangerous person in Rome wasn't a general, but a woman with ink-stained fingers? Cecilia rose like a goddess, flawed, glorious, terrifying. Messalina outlasted her, not through fire or fury, but by knowing when to speak and when to listen. This was never just a tale of emperors or battles. It was a war fought in bedrooms, in scroll rooms, and behind the eyes of women Rome never meant to remember. And still, here they are. If this story moved you, surprised you, or left you thinking, please like, comment, and subscribe. Your support helps keep these stories alive. And in the end, empire is not what you inherit, it's what you undo. Brian M. Brumbaugh.